long before the world knew the names of superheroes and thousands of years before the first comic book was inked. There was a kingdom hidden in the high, jagged peaks of East Africa that did not follow the laws of nature. This place was called Aksum, the City of Echoes. In this land, the people understood a secret that modern science has only just begun to guess at, that the universe is not made of atoms, but of sound. Everything, from the smallest grain of sand to the largest star, has a song. And if you know the song, you can control the object. The guardians of this kingdom were not soldiers with swords or archers with bows. They were an elite order of monks known as the Stone Singers. These men and women possessed voices that could shatter diamonds or make mountains float like clouds. They carried only one tool, a long, shimmering fork made of pure silver. When they struck this fork against the hard granite of the mountains, it produced a hum so deep that you didn't hear it with your ears. You felt it vibrating in your bones. By matching their voice to the frequency of the silver fork, the Stone Singers could cancel out gravity. Travelers who were lucky enough to see Aksum from a distance would rub their eyes in disbelief. They saw massive obelisks, stone towers weighing 500 tons, floating silently in the air, suspended by nothing but the collective humming of the monks below. It was a golden age of wonder. The Stone Singers built bridges of floating rock and palaces that drifted among the clouds. But their power was about to change forever with the arrival of a stranger from the north. His name was King Von. He was a tall, mysterious ruler who had crossed the burning deserts with a caravan of camels that stretched for miles. King Von did not come to conquer Aksum. He came to offer a gift. He brought with him a heavy chest made of acacia wood and covered in hammered gold. He called it the sunbox. The Stone Singers could feel the power of the box before they even saw it. The air around King Von crackled with static electricity. When he opened the lid, a light brighter than the midday sun poured out. It was a fragment of the first fire, a cosmic energy source that had fallen from the stars. The Stone Singers realized that their silver forks were just the key, but the sunbox was the engine. When they combined their sonic vibrations with the cosmic energy of the box, they became unstoppable. They could no longer just lift stones. They could control the weather. They could sing to the clouds to bring rain, or sing to the earth to grow crops overnight. Aksum became a paradise, a beacon of light in a dark world. But in a kingdom of sound, the most dangerous thing is a different kind of noise. Among the Stone Singers, there was a woman named Guda. She was the most talented of them all. Her voice was pure, sharp, and powerful. She could lift heavier stones than any man in the order. But Guda was not satisfied with just building beautiful towers. She began to experiment with forbidden frequencies. She spent her nights deep in the caverns beneath the city, listening to the dark, silent places of the earth. Guda discovered a terrifying truth. If sound is the power of creation, then silence is the power of destruction. She realized that by singing a negative note, a sound that cancels out all other sounds, she could unmake reality. She called it the Song of the Void. One evening, Guda tried to demonstrate her new power to the High Council. She struck her silver fork and opened her mouth, but instead of a hum, a terrifying vacuum of sound emerged. The torches in the room were instantly snuffed out. The stone floor beneath her feet turned to gray dust. The other Stone Singers fell to their knees, clutching their ears, bleeding from the pressure. Horrified by what she had done, the High Council banished her. They stripped her of her silver fork and cast her out of the floating city, throwing her into the savage, silent forests of the south. They believed that without the brotherhood of the singers, she would be powerless. They were wrong. Guda did not die in the forest. She survived. She sat in the darkness, embracing the cold and the quiet. Her hatred for the city that rejected her grew until it consumed her heart. She renamed herself the Queen of Silence. She realized that the Stone Singers relied on harmony and rhythm, so she would bring them chaos. For 20 years, she waited, gathering an army not of men, but of shadows, creatures of the deep earth that hated the light of the sunbox. She perfected her dark magic, learning to weave silence like a weapon. She knew that the Stone Singers were arrogant. They were looking at the sky, building their towers higher and higher, forgetting to look down at the roots. And then, on the night of the great festival, when the city was loudest with celebration, the Queen of Silence returned. She did not come with drums or trumpets. She came like a creeping fog. As the stone singers prepared to perform the Symphony of the Stars, they suddenly found their voices catching in their throats. The air grew heavy and cold. The floating stones began to tremble. Guda stood at the edge of the valley, her eyes pitch black. She opened her mouth, and for the first time in a generation, the world heard the scream of the void. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a violent absence of noise that sucked the life out of the air. The vibration of the city was disrupted. The harmony was broken. High above, the massive floating towers of Aksum gave a groan like a dying beast. The invisible grip of the stone singers failed. Gravity, which had been asleep for centuries, suddenly woke up.
The moment gravity woke up, the sky turned into a graveyard of stone. The massive floating towers of Aksum, which had hung weightlessly in the clouds for centuries, suddenly remembered how heavy they were. There was no time to run. There was no time to pray. With a sound that cracked the very bedrock of the continent, the city began to fall. It was chaos. Giant obelisks crashed into the mountainside, shattering into millions of pieces. Bridges made of crystal snapped like dry twigs, sending people plummeting into the valleys below. The dust cloud was so thick it blocked out the sun, turning day into instant night. In the center of the destruction, the stone singers tried to fight back. They were the masters of sound. They believed they could sing a countersong to stop the collapse. They raised their silver forks and opened their mouths to hum the note of stability. But Guda, the Queen of Silence, was ready for them. The dark magic she had learned in the forest was not just a powerful scream, it was a curse. As the monks tried to sing, they found their voices gone. They opened their mouths, but only a dry rattle came out. The air itself had been poisoned against them. Without their voices, they were just men in robes standing in the path of falling mountains. They were crushed where they stood. King Von, the stranger from the north, watched the destruction from the high terrace of the royal palace. He saw the Queen of Silence walking through the ruins, surrounded by her shadow soldiers. She didn't run, she glided. Everywhere she looked, the stone turned gray and brittle. She was not just destroying the city, she was hunting for the sunbox. She knew that if she possessed the cosmic fire inside it, her power would be absolute. She could silence the entire world forever. King Von knew the city was lost. His only duty now was to make sure the sunbox never fell into her hands. He gathered the last 3 surviving stone singers, the youngest of the order, and hauled the heavy golden chest onto a cart. They didn't take the main roads, those were burning. Instead, they ran toward the Forbidden Gorge, a deadly crack in the earth known as the Throat of the World. It was a place of jagged cliffs and bottomless pits, where even the goats refused to climb. As they ran, the Queen of Silence sensed the movement of the powerful artifact. She turned her black eyes toward the mountain pass and let out another screech of the void. The sound wave hit the cliff face above King Von. A massive landslide of rock and dirt came crashing down, separating the king and the monks from the rest of the world. They were trapped on a narrow ledge, with the enemy behind them and a sheer drop in front of them. King Von looked at the young monks. He saw the terror in their eyes. "Do not be afraid," he told them. "The stone listens to those who are true." With his final breath, King Von did not try to use the sun box as a weapon. Instead, he used it as a lock. He opened the lid just a crack, letting a single beam of pure cosmic light shoot into the wall of the cliff. The rock melted like wax, creating a deep, hidden cave. They shoved the sun box inside. Then, the monks used their silver forks one last time. They didn't sing a song of levitation, they sang a song of sealing. They struck the forks against the cave entrance, and the rock flowed back together, looking exactly like a natural mountain wall. There was no door. There was no keyhole. The sun box was buried in the solid stone, hidden perfectly. Moments later, the Queen of Silence arrived. She found only King Von standing alone on the ledge. She demanded to know where the fire was. When he refused to speak, she unleashed her rage. She turned him into a statue of ash, scattering him to the wind. She tore the mountains apart looking for the box, but she could not hear its hum. The ceiling song had worked. The sunbox was silent. Furious and denied her prize, Guda declared a new law over the ruins of Aksum. She destroyed every silver tuning fork she could find. She melted them down and poured the metal into the river. She hunted down anyone who remembered the old songs. She created a rule of absolute silence. Singing was forbidden. Humming was punishable by death. Even the birds were shot from the sky if they chirped too loudly. The age of sound ended. The kingdom of echoes became a graveyard. Over the centuries, the dust covered the shattered towers. The jungle grew over the ruins. The story of the floating city became a myth, then a legend, and finally, just a fairy tale told to scare children. The world forgot that men once flew. They forgot that the earth could sing. Hundreds of years passed. The Queen of Silence eventually died, but her curse remained. The people who lived in the shadow of the mountains were fearful and quiet. They were poor farmers who kept their heads down, unaware that they were walking on top of the greatest empire history had ever seen. But magic does not die, it just waits. Deep in the roots of the mountain, the sunbox was still humming, a faint heartbeat in the dark, waiting for someone to hear it. And fate has a funny way of choosing its heroes. It didn't choose a warrior. It didn't choose a king. It chose a boy who had never heard a single sound in his life.
Generations later, in a small, dusty village built on the edge of the old ruins, lived a boy named Zos. Life in the village was hard and joyless. The people were terrified of the mountains. They believed that if they made too much noise, the old demons would wake up and swallow them. So they whispered when they spoke. They walked softly on the grass. It was a land of fear. But Zos was different. Zos was born deaf. He lived in a world of total, absolute silence. He had never heard the wind, or the birds, or the fearful whispers of his neighbors. Because of this, the other children mocked him. They threw dirt at him and called him the Broken One. They thought he was weak because he could not hear their insults. They were wrong. Zos was not broken. He was tuned differently. Because his ears did not work, his other senses were sharp as razors. He could feel things no one else could. He could feel the thud of a rabbit's foot on the ground a mile away. He could feel the rhythm of the river current through the soles of his feet. While the villagers lived in fear of silence, Zos lived in the vibration of the world. One afternoon, while hiding from the bullies in the jagged rocks of the Forbidden Gorge, Zos saw something glinting in the dirt. He dug it out. It was a strange object, a long, two-pronged fork made of tarnished silver. It was heavy and cold. It was the last surviving tool of the stone singers, buried for 1,000 years. Zos didn't know what it was. He thought it was just a piece of scrap metal. He struck it against a large gray rock to knock the dirt off. Vom! Zos couldn't hear the sound, but he felt the shockwave travel up his arm and straight into his chest. It wasn't just a vibration, it was a heartbeat. The silver fork was resonating with the rock. And deep inside the cliff, something answered. The rock Zos had struck was not just a rock. It was the sealed door where King Von had hidden the sunbox. For the first time in centuries, the seal began to crack. A thin line of golden light spilled out from the stone. Zos stepped back, his eyes wide. The ground beneath his feet began to shake, not with an earthquake, but with a rhythm. The dust on the ground started to dance, but the light attracted darkness. From the shadows of the gorge, the spirits of the silence, the remnants of Queen Guda's curse, woke up. They were formless, smoky ghosts that hated sound. They saw the boy holding the silver fork, and they shrieked. Zos couldn't hear their screams, but he felt the air turn freezing cold. The ghosts rushed at him, trying to snuff out the light and kill the boy who had dared to wake the mountain. Zos fell backward, clutching the silver fork. He was terrified. He opened his mouth to scream for help, but he had never spoken a word in his life. He didn't know how to use his voice. The shadows loomed over him, their claws reaching for his throat. In that moment of life and death, the silver fork in his hand grew hot. The energy from the sunbox behind the wall reached out to him, connected with his heart. Zoe suddenly understood the ancient truth. Sound is not just what you hear. Sound is power. The vibration of the universe flowed into him. He realized he wasn't just a deaf boy, he was a living tuning fork. Zoe stood up. His eyes didn't just glow. They burned with the energy of a collapsing star. He looked at the rushing shadows. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the dust of his ancestors. And then Zoe spoke his first word. He didn't whisper. He didn't talk. He let out a single focused shout. No! The result was catastrophic. Because he had never spoken, his voice had no limit. It was amplified by the silver fork and the sunbox. The sound didn't just travel. It exploded. A massive shockwave of sonic energy blasted from his mouth, tore the fabric of the air. The ghostly shadows didn't just die. They were atomized, ripped apart into nothingness. The force of his shout hit the sealed cliff face, and the entire mountain cracked open. The sunbox tumbled out, glowing brighter than ever, and floated directly to Zoe's. It hovered in front of him, recognizing its new master. The golden light merged with the boy. The heavy silver fork melted into his skin, forming a strange metallic pattern on his chest, the mark of the king. The explosion of sound echoed across the entire continent. In the village below, the people fell to their knees, covering their ears. They looked up and saw something impossible. The ruins of the ancient towers were rising. The stones were lifting off the ground, floating once again, responding to the power of the new master. Zoe stood on a floating platform of granite, hovering high above the valley. He looked down at the people who had mocked him. He raised his hand, and the sunbox settled into his chest, becoming a part of his armor. He did not fix his hearing. He didn't need to. He was the black bolt of the mountains, a king who could level a city with a whisper and split the sky with a scream. The curse of silence was broken. The empire of Aksum did not return to exactly what it was, but it became a sanctuary again. Zoes remained there, the silent guardian on the throne of stone, watching over the world, ready to speak again if the darkness ever returned. And legend says, if you go to the mountains of Ethiopia today and put your ear to the ground, you won't hear silence. You will hear a low, steady hum. It is the song of Zoes, the boy who found his voice, keeping the earth in orbit.